As Stuart mentioned, this is the first talk in the 2012-2013 Sabin Sustainable Venture Prize Series. The talk is sponsored by Yale CBAE, the Center for Business and Environment, and will be broadcast simultaneously through the Yale livestream channel. So I want to welcome all of you who are here, as well as those who are watching online, to this speaker series. Today, we're quite pleased to welcome Dr. Richard Sandor, distinguished author and founder of the Chicago Climate Exchange. In today's talk, Richard will explore how financial innovation and derivatives can have a positive impact on areas of global importance. Dr. Sandor presents a view that financial derivatives and market-based practices can in fact be a force for good in addressing global issues, particularly with regard to the environment. Sandor is recognized as the father of financial futures for his pioneering work in developing the first interest rate futures contract in the 1970s, while he served as a chief economist at the Chicago Board of Trade. He's also a founder of the Chicago Climate Exchange, the world's first exchange to facilitate the reduction and trading of all 6 greenhouse gases. In 2007, he was named as the father of carbon trading by Time magazine for his work in designing, developing, and launching the Chicago Climate Exchange. He's currently a lecturer at the University of Chicago Law School and a distinguished professor of environmental finance at the School of Management at Peking University. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Richard Sandor as the inaugural speaker of the 2012-2013 Sabin Speaker Series.
It's a great thrill to be here. I think it's a little too loud. It's a great thrill to be here with all of you today. And Yale is a special place in my heart for environmental trading. I came here about 12 years ago when carbon trading was just a dream, and I made this presentation of what I'd like to do when I grew up. And then I came back after we launched it to kind of give a start on what we're doing, and then I guess it was 2006, I came back at the invitation of an old friend, Gus Speth, to give a progress report. So this is the 4th time I've been in this room, and it's been very fortuitous. I want to give you an update and talk to you today about good derivatives. Financial innovation has taken a pretty bad rap over the last 3 or 4 years. As eminent a person as Paul Volcker said, the only good financial innovation in the post-World War II period was the ATM. Pretty nasty. Joe Stiglitz, a Nobel Prize winner and quite a brilliant economist, thought that he couldn't really come up with any good complex derivative. I want to ask you, and why? Why has this happened? What does it mean for all of us? And most importantly, is it accurate? Everybody in the room know who Henry Ford is? Yeah. Anybody know who Luca Pacioli is? He's not the lead from The Godfather, okay? He didn't sleep with fish or anything like that. Anybody heard of him? Okay, I would make the following thesis. Luca makes Henry very, very small. Luca Pacioli is the father of accounting, okay, and invented a financial innovation. Why don't they get any talk? Why don't they get interest? They tend to be wholesale. They're not consumers, okay? They tend to be oftentimes group efforts like film, so it's hard to get an auteur. And they generally in the past have not been patentable. And I want to make the case that there is a class of good derivatives. And what are good derivatives? They are, and first of all, what's a derivative? A derivative is a financial instrument based on another one. I was asked in 1974 what we were going to call these things: Ginnie Mae futures, Treasury bond futures. And I said they really are like calculus. They are derived from something else, and that's the sense of where the word emanates. It is meant to be a calculus type of transformation of one type of financial instrument into another. Corn into corn options, securities into stock options, crude oil into futures. All of those are derivatives. Well, what's a good one? A good one is one that's transparent, one, centrally cleared, serves a price discovery function. What are prices in the future? And sometimes is meant for making or taking delivery. Its economic purpose is to facilitate risk transfer. What's a bad derivative? One that's opaque, not centrally cleared, and doesn't serve that purpose. Let me give you an example of a bad derivative. Greek debt, okay? With no offense to anybody who might be of Greek origin. Greek debt, insurance on the Greek government, sold for 27 basis points in 2007 and was not margined. Since its founding as a modern republic in 1829, the Greek government has been in default every other year, okay? And it was priced at 0.25% with no margin, no price transparency, and defaulted. How have these grown? And they've been remarkable. When I got interested in this business in 1970, first time, there was 13.7 million contracts. Last year, 22 billion. Compound growth rate of 18% a year. Bigger than airlines, automobiles, and every major industry save tech. What about the size of these exchanges? If you take a look at just the CME, the Intercontinental Exchange, and the CBOE, the market cap's in excess of $30 billion. Top 5 airlines, $24 billion, just to put it in perspective. The market cap really is just, as economists know, the cost of replacing something. It's not its economic value. So what is the economic value, and how does it get translated? Well, clearly one is hedging, and everybody from Keynes to Lester Telser argued about what they might be, and nobody really is certain, but the word backwardation was Keynes's word to describe the insurance cost of a futures contract. In addition to that, we have price discovery. And price discovery is not transparency. What I mean by price discovery is a farmer looks up at the quotations, sees soybean prices, sees corn prices, and makes a judgment which to plant. So he's in the fall. When it comes to the fall, he's able to make, or she is able to make, a decision without even touching the market. So we have hedging, we have price discovery. As a result of these markets, the wholesale to retail spread, what we call the bid-ask spread, has been crushed in markets that do it. So they have an overflow value of transparency. The kinds of people that use the risk transfer market are called hedgers. The kinds of people who undertake or underwrite the risk are called speculators. Speculator is a real bad name, right? but we have to distinguish between speculation and gambling. In gambling, the risk is created. There's no risk in Las Vegas or Macau until you build the casino. Soybean prices go up and down, as do interest rates, well before you build an exchange. And it's very important to distinguish it. And as a matter of fact, the evil words of speculation don't seem to apply to Steve Jobs, who basically found speculative capital called venture, got rid of his financial risk, was happy to assume the technology risk, and he gave it to a speculator. So private equity, other kinds of capital formation exists all the time with speculative capital. It got so bad in France in the 30s during the Spanish Civil War, Franco was having enormous problems. Food prices were going up. He didn't know what to do. So what he did was call in all of the speculators into Madrid for a meeting. And he stopped the high food prices. He murdered all of them. And sure enough, it had its effect. Grain prices fell, inventories were depleted. But what happened was the very next year, there was a short crop and drought ensued, and you had no buffer stocks and no carryovers. And speculation plays that role of inventorying things. What are some of the applications of good derivatives? Clearly, we've gone from 25% of disposable income on food down to 10% since 50. We're going through a major drought in the United States. Soybeans, corn at record levels, yet it all gets to where it's supposed to be. It will get harvested efficiently. Nobody rails about it, even in today's world. If we take a look at mortgages, when we started Ginnie Mae futures, the bid-ask spread was 3/4 of a point, bid-ask between the mortgage and the sale of it into a packaged security. It shrunk to a 30-second. The present value of that is $6,000 for every homeowner in the United States as a result of the transparency that the market brought. If we take a look at jet fuel, so we've got housing, we've got food, how about transportation? Southwest Airways survived by hedging its fuel costs while American and United went out of business and became bankrupt. How about banks? In 2007 and 2008, we had the biggest calamity that we have had in the world since the Depression. Not one bank failed because of interest rate risk. It's major input and output, and there was no failures to lack of interest rate risk management, in contrast to the decade of the 80s where we lost 5,000 S&Ls and 15 or 20,000 banks. Let's talk about 10-year debt. Now, government financing, not only banks and banking and risk management. The spread, when we wrote the 10-year note futures contract, the bid-ask spread was 1/8 to 1/4 of a point. It now trades in 64ths. The savings to the US government as a result of this transparency and the narrowing of spreads is somewhere between $250 to $500 million last year, depending on the way you measure it. But it's likely $500 million. The transaction costs in the secondary market, the savings are 6 to 10 billion. That goes for pensioners, et cetera. And anybody's looking for a PhD thesis topic, there is no work on this in the academic world about the narrowing of spreads and the economic benefit of reduced transaction costs associated with organized markets. None that I know of in major. There's tries at it, but nobody's really written a book on the value of these markets. The last thing, and I'll get to because of the audience of a good derivative, is essentially the first use of cap and trade to deal with acid rain. In the 1980s, Michael Douglas made a movie called Black Rain. You know, it was a metaphor for everything evil. We had 18 million tons into the atmosphere. It was concentrated. Congress passed a law, the Clean Air Act of 1990. Of the 800 pages, there's 15 pages, and that's all you needed to build cap and trade into the legislation. We worked on it, a number of other people did, but it was a wide scale use. Cap and trade, for those of you who are not familiar with it, essentially you can deal with an environmental problem by command and control, just mandating everybody reduce by 10%, or actually mandate actual fixes. Or you can say everybody has to lower it by 10%, and if you're particularly good at this, and I'm not so good, you can fuel switch from high sulfur to low sulfur coal. I can't, my boilers won't allow that. I've got to go through a technology fix and build a scrubber. I can buy the excess reductions and hedge myself while I'm installing the technology. This program is down to 3 million tons, 3 million from 18 million. The annual savings in healthcare costs last year were $123 billion. And the cost of the program was 1.3. And every year, 30 to 40,000 people lived that would have died if you had the emissions in the 80s. The most successful program that I know about it. And it was rewarded in Washington, D.C. by scrapping the program. But we'll get to that in the question and answer period. This, you know, was my first experience with it. We ultimately had auctions at the Board of Trade in a 5th grade class. Actually decided the best way to deal with acid rain was to buy permits, allowances, rights to emit, and retire them. The teacher taught the class about cap and trade by handing out chewing gum rights. And if you didn't chew your gum, you could sell it to somebody else. And that's how the kids learned this very complex program called cap and trade. It's just a use right that you give out less and less, and it works very, very well. In about 1995, I got interested, pre-Kyoto, I worked with a man by the name of Maurice Strong to try to get a voluntary program because we didn't think Kyoto would get off the ground. Eventually it did, and we set up this voluntary exchange in the United States. Everybody said nobody will join an exchange without law, okay? Nobody would join without mandation by the federal government. And you could never get anybody to volunteer and cut their emissions and do it on a legally binding contractual basis. We got 450 members. We got IBM, DuPont, Intel, Ford, Honeywell, et cetera. 110 companies, 700 million tons. Why did they join? Ford joined because they saw it as a competitive weapon. If they got started in 03 here, they could deal with how to carbon account in Marseille and Stuttgart and places like that. AEP, the largest coal-fired utility, joined We had an expression in Chicago, and they wanted to be involved in any prospective legislation. That was their motive. The expression around the exchange was, if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu, okay? And so it's good reason to be at the table. Baxter joined just because they said there's a healthcare issue, and how can we be a sustainable company and not deal with the environment? DuPont joined because they could find a way to make refrigerants without HFCs and could make a ton of money by changing their manufacturing process. How'd they do? They cut, in the pilot program from 03 to 10, they cut emissions by 400 million tons, more than France. They also dealt with 53 million tons of offset, 11 million tons that arose from better forestry management, so they cut totally or offset 469 different areas. Most importantly, they sent price signals. And everybody said, and it's a very important lesson, you can't possibly get people to change behavior with $1 or $2 carbon. There's a guy by the name of Isaac Berzin who developed a process to turn algae into jet fuel. He's a professor at MIT, and he thought he could cut tonnage by 100 million tons a year, and $1 a ton would give him 100 million a year in profit, and he raised $10 million and is now listed as one of the most important inventors, and $1 carbon did that. We put together a rural program in India. Big problem in India is animal waste. So you can take micro digesters, shovel the animal waste into these containers, the methane rises to the top, you run a copper tube into a house, and as a result of that, the family can cook with the gas. The young girls don't have to go and forage wood, a spillover social benefit. There's less lung disease. And they made, on $1 carbon, the average family made $20 a year. You may not think that's a lot, but when it's $1 a day, that's an awful lot. We started with 3,000 families. We got up to 15,000, 50,000, and when we sold the exchange, we had 100,000 rural poor in a program that eliminated methane and stopped it from going into the air and lived better as a result of it. So there's a widespread application here. And let me talk about some final thoughts and where I think things are going. What are the next major accidents here? U.S. has a $15.5 trillion economy. $15.5 trillion. Anybody want to guess at what the entire policy surplus for the insurance companies are for given hurricanes, earthquakes, tornadoes, loss of life? It's $550 million. One event could take it out. And it's the same issue of risk-based capital. And if we got together at Yale, two gentlemen and I and all of you, what's a good strategy for us to make a ton of money? Go to Florida or go to the San Andreas Fault and just walk it and then write insurance every step of the way. Take the biggest risk you can, and if it goes wrong, you have a free put to the state of California because nobody's going to let homeowners go under. So this free put now offers a case where we seem not to have learned anything from 07 and 08. Other foods for thought. Legislation. Constitution, 6 pages. The bill establishing the Fed, 25 pages. The SO2, the part related to cap and trade, 15 pages. Dodd-Frank, anybody? 2,300 pages, bigger than the New Testament, the Old Testament, and the Quran combined. So you can govern 3 major world religions in less pages than you can to figure out risk-based capital. If somebody at my University of Chicago class came up to me and couldn't define swaps in a page, I would kindly suggest that maybe finance was not something they should pursue full-time. The CFTC definition of a swap is 865 pages. Google it. It's a paragraph, 2 sentences, 5, 10. Other food for thought. Are these great crises in markets to be served by better rating agencies? We have 4 companies in the United States that have a AAA rating, 14 in the world, and from 2000 to 2008, S&P and Moody's rated 17,000 securities AAA. Is that the solution, or is it the problem? Where are we going? I think we're going next in environmental markets away from the United States. I will, in honor of Mr. Chen coming from Guangdong to this thing, I will say it wouldn't surprise me if China beats us to an efficient cap and trade market. The Korean legislature just passed 98% to start cap and trade. Vietnam floated it. Kenya is looking into it. Mexico has one, and Brazil is starting one, and India is going to have 3 provincial. So everybody says cap and trade is dead. It's only dead in Washington, D.C. And the probability of these markets working is inversely related to the distance from Washington, D.C. California is starting a cap and trade, and it'll be auctions in October. Europe's working. It's just the United States political system is broken. And that is the difficulty with cap and trade, not the concept or its efficient usage. Where do the next 40 years come? And I'll finish with this. I think the next huge opportunity and the next big problem is water. Okay, that basically water quality and water quantity. And that we will see market-based solutions to deal with desertification and to deal with water quality problems. And there will be vast scales of cap and trade in water, not called cap and trade, called nutrient trading or conservation credits or anything else but the word cap and trade. So this legislation works. I'm as optimistic over the next 40 years that we're going to develop markets that can deal with social issues, environmental issues, and that they will become routine, and the U.S. will be a follower. Ultimately, we will get it because it's never a good idea to short the United States. It's entrepreneurship, its ability to rise. So I'm long-term optimistic. It's great to be here with all of you. You are the best and brightest, and it always puts a smile on my face to come back to Yale to talk about this subject. Thank you all very much. I think I'm supposed to take questions, which I'm happy to do. Yes, sir.
So the purpose of cap and trade and other pricing mechanisms for pollutant context of using financial instruments to do that, many participants in the systems don't really understand what a financial derivative is. So to that point, who are the major actors and players that need to come on board to move forward with more market-based solutions?
My own feeling in every market that I've been involved with, whether it's financial futures, whether it's the United States or the London Exchange, financial futures, or it's SO2 or carbon, there's 4 elements that you have to deal with. Number 1 is legislation. 4 elements in the creation of a new market. The second is regulation. The third is the institution building, the exchange. And the fourth is the design of the contract. As Professor Coe says in the introduction, the development of new markets is really a very complex web of educational needs. So every time I've developed a new market, first place I went to the university. Because in my opinion, it takes 20 years. So if I'm talking to all of you in your 20s, you'll be corporate leaders 20 years from now. So it starts here. Markets 0 to 2 is infancy, 2 to 5 is teenager, 5 to 10 is young adult, 10 to 20 is senior, okay, mature adults. So it's 20 years. I don't know why, but they didn't use the personal computer in journalism schools for 5, 6 years after Steve Jobs invented it. Power steering was invented in the 1930s, didn't get used until the 50s. The web took 20 years after the personal computer. So you start with students. Then you start with academics because you want that to be taught by academics in their curriculum. Then it's not foreign when you see it used. So you build with that. You have to educate the lawyers, which is one hell of a job. And then you've got to educate the accountants. Then you've got to educate the back offices of financial institutions, and then you have to do management and an executive training and educate CEOs and CFOs. And hopefully, after you do that, you build an exchange, which means you have to educate the people of Washington. It used to be. Now you just have to lobby them, not educate them. And it's not because they're bad people, it's just the system is, that's the way it works. You've got to educate the regulator, right? You need to get the commissioners on board of the regulatory agency, and very importantly, you have to educate the staff, right? Then you have to educate people who are futures brokers and options brokers, so they can go out and sell the product. And then last, you have to write a contract. And a good contract is one that either everybody likes or nobody likes. Okay, it can't favor the buyer or the seller. Everybody's got to walk away a little hungry and say, this is not perfect. Okay, and it's very important to recognize when you're inventing a financial instrument that perfection is the enemy of good. You kind of want to get it commoditized, but not perfectly so, because then somebody has an advantage and it will be manipulated. It's got to be a little what we call English in it, a little spin to it, and that's an art. And I've failed at a lot of them, which I thought were good, like kilo gold. I said, everybody trades kilo gold. Why are we going to trade 100 ounces? This is 1975. The world is behind. Everybody deals in kilo bars. Well, it turns out I was behind. It only had to be 100 ounces plus or minus 5 and be shiny, and 3 nines fine. And you could calculate the dollar value of it easily. you couldn't educate kilos to professional traders. It was a pain in the neck. Okay, we trade cookie wheat in Chicago. Cookie wheat is the benchmark for worldwide wheat where bread wheat should do. Well, I said, that's ridiculous. How can you be trading cookie wheat? You should trade bread wheat. Failed. Died on arrival. Okay, so what's obvious isn't necessarily going to work. That's a very long answer, but it's a very complex problem. I hope I got that across.
Hey, Jack, real quick, just wait for the microphone, just so we're recording this, and make sure to introduce your name and the school you're talking about as well.
Is my walking around bothering?
No.
I'm restless.
Hello, my name is Pedro from School of Management. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the voluntary market you were discussing, where you had the reductions of around 400 million tons of emissions. What is the dollar value of that market, and what are the strategies for growing it?
It doesn't exist anymore. In 2010, I sold the exchange to the Intercontinental Exchange, and the pilot ended, and they did not extend it. They did extend the European Climate Exchange, which is now the largest market in the world, and they did extend the Tianjin Climate Exchange. But the voluntary market, I think, it's hard for me to make suppositions about why, but it's clear that Washington played a role in it, and the lack of prospects. And when the towel was thrown in 2 months after we sold it, I think they voted not to continue the market. Another thing, what else you have to do, which I didn't answer, you got to finance all of this, right? You start an exchange, you start a new market, you go through it. We got started by a grant from a foundation. Then I did what most entrepreneurs did. My knees are bloodied from groveling for money. We hit friends and family, and one thing which I think you might find interesting, our first outside investor was the Jesuits, who put in $1.6 million in capital. And those of you in management who've been from the business world, this is like a Magritte painting where fish fly and birds swim. When you talk to Father Francis about his investment in the Chicago Climate Exchange, my secretary would come in hushed over and say, "It's Father Francis on the phone, Richard." And I would pick up the telephone and I would say, "Hello, Father." And he would say, "Hello, Richard." And then he would ask me something you would never want a priest to ask you. "Richard, how's your burn rate?" "It's not too good, Father." "You signing up any members?" "No, Father." "Are the prospects good for legislation?" "No, Father." And then he would end it as I've never heard in 40 years an investor in an enterprise end a conversation, and he'd say, "I pray for you every night, Richard." Anyway, Father Francis came in at about a half a pound or so, I don't know, or a pound. We sold the company at 7.5 pounds. He made 15 times his money, and it was the happiest day of my life because I wanted to make sure his client was well served. And so the financing is a big part of it as well. You've got to start a new business, train people, market, choose an electronic platform, decide the bid offer spread, the price increments in carbon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a lot of work. 10 years. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Anna, and I'm from
Go ahead.
Forestry and Environmental Science.
Hi, Anna.
Hello. It's really unfortunate that you're here today because following this class, following this talk in one of my classes, we'll be discussing an article by Larry Lohman titled Carbon Trading, Climate Justice, and the Production of Ignorance, 10 Examples. I don't know if you're familiar with it. You're actually quoted in the article, but it goes through some of his reasons why he thinks that carbon trading is not a viable means of actually reducing CO2 emissions for reasons such as offsets not really, no one can quantify whether they are equivalent to CO2 emissions. If you emit in one area of the world and somebody buys permits for reductions from that area, does it really have the same effect?
Let me get into some of this. Number one, you saw offsets are trivial, okay? And so everybody makes, because it's good journal writing, it's good press, you talk about not really sweating. There's something perverse, I find, with a certain set of environmentalists who think that you're not doing good unless you have pain, okay? You need to suffer to be doing good. And offsets isn't a suffering thing. It's an easier solution. I just don't buy it. I think that these people are the same people who talked about how automobiles would never work, horses were better, that the personal computer wasn't necessary, there's no economic role for it. I think it's such a yesterday argument when everybody who is bright in China and India and Brazil, the countries that are growing enormously, are experimenting with cap and trade, and yet our journalists and a lot of our academics are debunking it. So I'd love to be here because I think it's absurd on its face.
One of the other points was that carbon trade might stymie technological innovation. What do you think in regards to that?
Do you think pricing somebody, what did we talk about? People in India, Isaac Brazin, you want to know what something is worth, it spurs innovation. You know, that kind of argument says we don't want to know the price of anything, right? When economists spend most of their time trying to figure out price because it's such a pregnant signal. You know, the problem is, and it's what killed cap and trade in the United States, is people forget when Napoleon called in his generals after an unsuccessful battle, he said, when I said take Vienna, I meant take Vienna. The implication was, I didn't tell you to go to the suburbs. I didn't tell you to go to Salzburg. The military objective is to do this. By and large, very often the principal objective gets added on to in Washington, D.C. So we forget that the climate bill was meant to reduce CO2 emissions. It had 1,500 pages of goodies and built-in arbitrages because somebody said there's no justice. And I was actually in a meeting and I said, I think we're here to reduce climate change. I'm afraid of it for my kids and my grandkids. And they said, no, we're here about justice. And I said, I must be at the wrong meeting. You can take care of justice on Sunday in your church, and you can deal with the moral implications. I thought we're here to stop desertification and stop climate change and stop the glare. No. So you get 100 sub-goals built into a piece of legislation because you have to get buy-in. Not because these are bad people. It's just the way it works. When I was dealing with a person in Washington on the Hill whose name shall not be mentioned, and I said to their chief of staff, I'd like to come into DC to tell you about the Chicago Climate Exchange, what we got right and what we got wrong. how much it costs to monitor, how did we do with it, how did we verify, all of those things. And the response was, we don't talk to anybody until after we write the bill. And I said, this is the dumbest thing I have ever heard. And then a week later, I said, that's the smartest thing I've ever heard. Because they're right. Because if you do it that way, you maximize campaign contributions, right? Because you create problems that have to be fixed. And if they have to be fixed, you have lobbyists, lawyers, etc. So the initial piece of legislation, just as a viewpoint, it's not meant to solve a problem because you don't maximize the income or re-election probabilities by getting it right at the outset. Which is, and again, not because these are bad folks, it's just the way DC works. Washington, DC just surpassed Silicon Valley in the highest per capita income in the United States. It doesn't produce anything but laws and regulations.
Is this working? Tyler Van Leeuwen from the School of Management. So to follow up on your point there, if the government is going to be involved in crafting some kind of climate legislation in the U.S., you seem to think it's going to be cap and trade. Do you have any faith in their ability to do that well and to create a market that would have your good derivatives as opposed to something that's a failure?
Not now. 5 years from now, yes, but not now. It will take the Chinese to do it successfully and the Indians to do it successfully. We will be, unfortunately, we are a laggard, when it comes to these issues. Will it happen eventually? Yeah. Because I'm from Chicago and we wrote it off as the Rust Belt in 1990. It's never been more vibrant. This country, the bright young people I've been talking to and will be talking to, I'm going to West Point and talk to cadets, 4,000 of them on Thursday, and on to your sister schools and around the world. And every time I walk out of an experience like this, I get optimistic because you have tabula rasas. The slate is pretty clean, and it's your country. And I think the young people will not be put aside eventually. Now, yes, but over the long term, no. So the answer is maybe 2017 to 2020 in the United States. 2015 in China. 2013 maybe, actually. 2 provinces. Mr. Chen is here from one of them, Guangdong and Hubei. Our starting pilots. Shanghai began 2 months ago. And Guangdong just began. Yeah, 3 cities have begun. So I don't look to Washington, D.C., I look to Beijing. I don't look to Washington, I look to Delhi. I don't look to Washington, I look to Sacramento. Study those markets. There's career opportunities here. Watch what's going on in the environment outside the United States for the solvers.
How to establish the standard for the common rate so that other countries, including Japan,
The question is, how do you get a standard? So let me kind of talk to that for a second, because we argue and have argued for the last 15 years it won't be Kyoto. Okay, it will be a plurilateral regimes in different countries linked with certain same instruments. And it will develop like the cotton market developed with a center in Mumbai, a center in Alexandria, Egypt, a center in Winterthur, a center in Liverpool, and they will evolve into a worldwide homogeneous commodity. It won't come from one top-down fix. It will follow the pattern of commodity development. And if you look at grain trade, the Board of Trade invented grain standards. It took till 1910, from 1848, before the US government adopted those. So they were proved and tried in the private sector and then ratified by the government. So I would expect that to happen. We will have, I think, centers in Europe. We'll have one in North America. We'll likely have one in South America, one in China, one in India, probably one in Japan, and Australia, New Zealand, small markets there.
Thank you, Dr. Sandor, for a terrific talk. What you just said actually inspired a new question than the one I've been dying to ask you, so I'll just blurt it out. In the beginning of your talk, you said that an aspect of a good derivative is price discovery and transparency. And what you just described is a fragmented system of different centers of trade. And so I'm wondering, how do you see that path towards price transparency? To give you a little background, I have my previous life before I was an academic, I was in the carbon market. And that lack of price transparency really made things tough.
Yeah, it was tough because it was an over-the-counter market. And if we go back, look, no exchange failed in 07, 08, or 09. Not the London Stock Exchange, not the Paris Bourse, not any derivatives exchange. 78 of them in 36 countries had the Chicago model. And they all worked. And they were all transparent, they were all regulated. And I think it will evolve to regulated, transparent markets. I think the danger, the toxicity, comes from opaqueness and no regulation. We did something very different. I called up Mary Shapiro, who was then in charge of FINRA. Mary was the CFTC commissioner, and I knew her. And I said, Mary, I'm going to ask you to do something that you probably will be very surprised at. And she said, what's that? I said, I want to be regulated. We're exempt, okay? Because I don't want this to be viewed as a Chicago thing. Ford's data's phony. We want to print the prices. We want to do that. And the problem in 07 and 08 and in the carbon market outside of the European carbon market and our carbon market is they were opaque, and this is where the problems come. They weren't regulated, they weren't centrally cleared. You know, we're curing some of it with Dodd-Frank, but not all of it. It's a real easy fix. The problem is the process that you go through in legislation is designed to create regulatory or tax arbitrages, right? Because you solve half of the problem, but the result is it throws another problem, or if you're smart, another financial opportunity right in your face. And this is the difficulty.
Well, that sort of brings me to my original question for you, which is that your critics say that, you know, the unexpected, unprecedented success of the CCX, the popularity with industry, et cetera, was due to very lenient baselines and low additionality standards. And your proponents say, hey, this was a pilot program, you were proving that something could work, you needed industrial buy-in. And so I'm wondering, now that you've worked on so many exchanges, how do you view that trade-off between environmental integrity and industrial usability?
Well, part of it was meant to show what it was, by the way, inaccurately, it wasn't lax. It was the same reductions that was in McCain, Lieberman, and Waxman-Markey. So if you extended, we had a 6% cut for 7 years, and if it would have gone on, it would have been the same reduction that all of the federal legislation. So that's just fact. Two, I'm driven by, and all of you going into this, it's a good message here to look at the way things develop, and that is, don't go for perfection, okay? I mean, it is not the idea. The idea is to get it off the ground. We never use the word failure at CCX or any other company I've run. These are trials, okay? There's a drug called Salvicin 606, 19th century, developed by Emil Ehrlich. It was to deal with venereal diseases at the time. You know why it's called 606? He got it wrong 605 times. Okay, please be guided of not seeking perfection or fear of failing. That my particular approach is to people is just get it going. Just start. The Wright brothers flew for 90 seconds at 60 feet high. They didn't have seat belts, okay? They had nothing. In a trial, and when you're inventing, and Stephen Jobs' first PC, I did a PhD in 1966, 1,000 years ago in the Jurassic era. This thing has got more power than the IBM 1620. I'd lug around batch processing cards. I mean, we demand perfection in environment when we don't demand it medically, technologically, industrially, in any field of inventive activity. We accept that the first model is not going to be perfect. We seem to falsely demand that the environment has to be perfect. You just need to clean up a bunch of water. You need to clean up a bunch of SO2. You need to clean up a bunch of arsenic. You need to get these programs going, and then you can always tighten and perfect. And I think to all of you who are going to go out in your careers and whatnot, please, these are trials. Don't look for perfection. You're going to get disappointed. And some of the greatest inventions we've ever had that have saved lives never started without its critics. Because if you're doing something, you're an agent of change. I was pretty comfortable at CCX because the right wing hated us because they thought we were a bunch of environmentalists, and the left wing hated us because they thought we were a bunch of capitalists. And I thought, this is good, you know. It's where I want to be, because if you're going to do something disruptive, you're going to, by definition, gouge an establishment. And it's pretty high that most people with any new product are not going to like you. You can imagine going to Wall Street in 1972 and saying, I'm from Chicago, and I'm here to narrow your spreads. Okay, this is what I'd like to do. I want to take all those opaque markets you work in, and I want to make them public. They said, why don't you go back to Berkeley, you know, and teaching? That suits you well. The capital markets aren't for you. So if you're going to be involved in something disruptive, don't expect the establishment to be pleased. And if they are pleased, you got to question your premises. You know, you want to be disruptive. I think I'm happy to go on, but I think that I'm seeing a signal here that it's time to get everything. Let me just say to you, you know, again, Yale never disappoints. You are the best and the brightest. We do need people doing regulated, transparent markets. We need a lot of faith in using these markets. We just have to police them. Derivatives are like hammers, okay? You can use it to go bash somebody's head in, or you can use it to build a house. So go build houses. Thank you.